Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year. Hopefully, this 2021 will be a little bit better than the year that has just passed. My name is Francesco Tamagnini, and we briefly met virtually in the first term. This term, I will be with you with some other lectures concerning physiology. And today we will talk about homeostasis. So if I'm going to do a good job, by the end of this lecture, you will be able to identify the basic and describe the basic organization of the body systems-based physiology. You will be able to define what homeostasis is and define illness in relationship to the concept of homeostasis as a disruption of homeostasis. And in particular, you will be able to describe and identify physiological feedback systems as systems to maintain homeostasis, and finally to mention some examples of homeostasis. Now, remember that this physiology lecture links with the next year's content, particularly PM2C2 and PM3A and PM3B. Sorry, I haven't. I've put PM3A, PM3A. I will correct it in the final video. Yes, you will need to know this concept very accurately, and this is one of those concepts that you will need to bring with you for the rest of your career. Here there is some bibliography that you can consult in relationship to what homeostasis is. Usually the initial chapters, since it's such a cornerstone concept. And homeostasis is a definition as the study of the normal function of living organisms. So physiology comes from the word physis, which means nature, and logos, which is the study, the speech. And the human physiology is about human beings and how their body function. So while physics is the study of nature in general, physiology is the study of the bodily function. And we can differentiate between cellular physiology and system physiology. So, for example, I am mostly a cellular physiologist, particularly an electrophysiologist. Cellular physiology basically focuses on the ways that the cell and cellular biochemical processes interact with itself and with the environment. While system physiology is related to systems of organs without organisms, such as the renal system, the cardiovascular system, and the respiratory system. Now, remember that the cell itself is an organism, so never consider systems as something functional as a result of the cells that are like bricks put one on top of each other. That's not the case. Every organism, every multicellular organism works more as a combination of the functions of the macroscopic system and the function of the single cell that composes the system, which composes the tissue, which composes the organ, which composes the system. But the cell itself is a complex physiological homeostatic system. So physiological systems work more like Chinese boxes, where each compartment is somehow functional per se and homeostatic per se, and the function of the overall macroscopic system arises as the coordinated activity of single homeostatic systems. So in terms of system physiology, you can see that the body on the functional point of view is canonically divided in the respiratory system, which is obviously tightly connected with the cardiovascular system. These separations are good to learn how things are, but they should be taken with a pinch of salt. Okay? I mean, the respiratory system, of course, is not separated from the cardiovascular system. They work tightly together with each other. And the same goes for the renal system, the cardiovascular system, and the respiratory system. It's not just having, some sort of a spiritual, holistic approach. I mean, it is physically like that. We will see it especially when we will study the renal system, how the renal system is involved in the regulation of acid-base balance in the blood, the concentration of salts in the blood, and in the regulation of blood pressure. And you will see how the renal system cannot exert any of these functions if not in concert with the cardiovascular system and the respiratory system. Same goes for the gastrointestinal tract and especially the endocrine and the nervous system. On top of this, and the reason why I haven't added this is because, that is a complex enough chapter in itself, is the immune system. The endocrine and the nervous system make with the immune system a more complex, sophisticated system of information processing, which is the immunoneuroendocrine system. Which basically works in the same way. Conceptually, on the physical point of view, it works as a hub that receives information from the environment, processes this information, and generates an adequate response. With few differences in the dynamic and in the directionality and the kinetic of the response, but ultimately in very similar ways. And the endocrine, the nervous, and the immune system are heavily overlapped with each other. And then finally, the musculoskeletal system, which is involved in locomotion, maintenance of posture, breathing, protection, So why do we have all these organs? I guess this is a bit of a philosophical more than a physiological question, right? I guess we need all these systems to be alive. But in a way, we can say that being alive means keeping internal homeostasis or homeostasis. I never understood where the accent goes. And Claude Bernard is the lad who noticed and formalized for the first time in the 60s of the 19th century that there's something about living things. Living things keep their internal environment, their conditions, like any condition, right? Temperature, concentration of salts, pH, stable. There's something stable about the chemical, physical properties of the internal environment of all living things, from bacteria to human beings, passing through fungi, plants, and animals. And particularly speaking of animals, homeostasis has been defined as the constancy of the internal environment, which is a requirement for an animal to stay alive. Okay. In 1929, so while Claude Bernard somehow, noticed this phenomenon, right? He calls it la fixité, the fixation, like the conditions somehow being constant, chemical and physical conditions, right? So chemical composition and physical properties such as pH, temperature, osmolarity, and so on and so forth. In 1929, William Cannon coined the term, right? You see, it's important to give words. We're animals that use words, and when we have a word, then we can associate a thought to that word, right? So it becomes a thing when you give it a name, and homeostasis is the name for it. And he wrote this wonderful book called The Wisdom of the Body, which describes basically what is the current concept of homeostasis, and which is what Bernard said, the constancy of the internal environment as a requirement for animals to be alive. So the theme that is at the center of the concept of homeostasis is internal environment. What is the internal environment? Okay, because there's some confusion sometimes, in common sense on what the internal environment is. You can't have this confusion. You need to know exactly what the internal environment is. And we will talk about that in a second. So before we get into that, conformers are those more primitive organisms which cannot easily adjust the conditions of their internal environment, which means that they're restricted to the environment that they can be in. So, for example, if we're talking about a temperature conformer like a lizard, and you put a lizard in cold, that lizard will not be able to keep its body temperature, the temperature of its internal environment constant. It doesn't necessarily die, but it's not able to keep it constant. So it means that its behavior is, when I mean behavior, the behavior of the internal environment is affected deeply by the environment itself. So it means that if outside there are 20 degrees, inside of the lizard there will be 20 degrees, and so on and so forth. So these animals have a certain degree of, how can I say, adaptation, right? They can survive to a certain extent in different environments with different temperatures, but they're very restricted because, as we will see, homeostatic parameters are very, very restricted. So they're restricted to constant environments. And usually what they do is to move to such environments. Same goes for fish. While regulators are able to control the internal environment. By being able to control the internal environment, they can explore more hostile and variable environments. This is quite amazing. We'd never really realize how awesome we are. We always look at science fiction movies and we look at cyborgs or robots that have these great adaptability systems that allow them to live in very extreme conditions like deep space and da. But as a matter of fact, on Earth, there is a huge variety of environments. And while most of the organisms can live in cold and in heat at the same time, we can. Because in heat, we sweat. And in cold, we shake. Or we, we adapt, we generate heat. Of course, within limits, we can get hypothermic inside, but thanks to our abilities, we can explore a wide variety of environments. And it's not by chance that actually mammals are widespread in very different climates and weathers. So, as I said, lizard is a conformer, while human beings are regulators. Same when it comes to temperature. Okay, so here specifically I'm talking about the physical quantity, the homeostatic parameter temperature. It's not the only one. Okay? So homeostasis is the control and the stabilization of the internal environment. And just to remind you what the internal environment is, the internal environment is the extracellular fluid, okay? And the extracellular fluid is composed by the plasma in the blood, the interstitial fluid that there is between one cell and another, and the transcellular fluid, which is more rare, like CSF joints and ocular fluids, while the intracellular fluid, what is inside of cell, and which, as a matter of fact, represents most of the water which composes our body, that is not the internal environment. It's still an homeostatic environment, but it doesn't follow the same rule of the homeostasis of the internal environment. That's why I was stressing the idea that you shouldn't consider organisms as sum of cells, but a combination of complex organisms that are the cells themselves. So when we speak about the homeostasis of a multicellular animal, such as the human being, we talk about the control and the stabilization specifically of the internal environment. What is the internal environment? Is the extracellular fluid. What composes the extracellular fluid? Plasma, interstitial fluid, and transcellular fluid. What is not the internal environment? The intracellular fluid. I'm stressing these because you need to know this. Okay? These are all very important concepts that you will have to take with you for the rest of your life. So for a 70-kilogram man, of adult age, 60% of those 70 kilograms are water, so around 42 liters of water. As you can see, most of that is intracellular water, so 28 liters, while only a smaller fraction of that is the water which composes the internal environment. It's composed by plasma, interstitial water, and transcellular water. So now I'm finishing this section because we have to make a 20 minutes section for some reason. And I will start the next session, which is number 2, on the same topic. See you in a second.